I would just like to get your thoughts on the entire fallout of everyone involved in the Bucs passing game, Julio included.
Well, I was taking your word on the contract. I didn't look it up. $6 million is pretty significant, but not outrageous certainly for a player of Julio's track record. This was an interesting signing. I of course was hoping that the Packers would land Julio on a prove-it deal, but he lands with the Buccaneers, gives Tom Brady yet another weapon, and then also Chris Godwin was not placed on PUP to start the camp, which is really good news for him. And I would also say really good news for Tom Brady, who looks like he might start the season with all four of his primary weapons now: Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, and Russell Gage. As far as Jones, you hear stuff about him being washed. That may or may not be, but he's 33. Usually these elite guys play pretty well into their mid-30s. His issue has been hamstring pulls, soft tissue injuries, and last year he was a 1.76 yards per route run, which was 31st amongst 110 eligible receivers, PFF stat. And that was a career low by pretty wide margin. He's usually top 5, if not number 1 overall in that stat. So the point is that he's probably not the Julio of old. I don't think any of that surprises anybody, but can he help this team? I think he probably can. And I'm guessing that the goal will be to kind of ease Godwin in, really ride Mike Evans and Russell Gage at the start of the year, get Jones involved, but maybe rotate Jones and Godwin until Godwin's 100%, and then you might see them rotate Jones and Gage, and maybe run some four receiver sets as well. So for that reason, I'm not like super bullish on Julio. I think he's going to be a part-time player. If there's an injury to one of those 4 guys, or I guess one of the other 3 guys, then he suddenly might play 70, 80, 90% of the snaps in any given week, and he'll be very useful in that sort of a role. But I think, if all 4 are healthy, he'll be a part-timer. This all sort of knocks Mike Evans down a bit because he's not going to see the potential immense target volume that we were perhaps going to see if Godwin were going to miss the first month and Julio wasn't signed and it was just Evans and Gage and everybody else. So he dropped a little bit in the rankings as well. Gage dropped a little bit in the rankings just because things are a little bit tighter. And then Godwin moved up because it looks like he may be ready for week 1.
You can, of course, access all of them just by being ahead of ADP on Tom Brady. That's probably the best way to go here. Of course, you do need stacking options, at least for best ball tournaments, not necessarily for your 12-team redraft leagues. But I do want to, like you, I'm glad you have that opinion, because I also want to temper the expectations of what Julio Jones can do individually. There was a rumor going around, first of all, for the last 2 years, actually, that some friends have passed along to me that discuss and talk with agents, and that Julio Jones, like the past 2 years, post-large contract, has practically been checked out of football, a la Allen Robinson last season, just disgruntled really with the situation. And his play, Julio's, practically defines that. 6.1 targets per game over the last 2 years, including being targeted last season on a below average 19% of his routes run. And then in 2 starts without A.J. Brown for the Titans, literally totaled just 2 targets in those 2 games where he was the perceived alpha. You mentioned as well the career low and yards per route run with Tennessee. And it's just a similar situation in my mind to Le'Veon Bell, to A.J. Green of last year, where everyone's drafting via nostalgia and not what we are already learning about avoiding players in this stage of their career. Every argument on this show, though, essentially boils down to a player's ADP. We don't hate or like players. It comes down to their ADP. That's our job. And so I don't know what ADP it would take for me to personally get in on Julio, believing he has standalone value, but I know he's going to shoot past it. I know how everyone's going to interpret and overhandle and overthink this situation. And so thus, for my opinion to be his absolute ceiling and best case scenario at this stage of his career to be a weekly flex option at best, then I know for a fact, like, I'm just never going to draft him, because that's not where he's going to go via drafts, because everyone will, again, chase their childhood and chase what they love about Julio Jones's past career, not his current status. So that's where I'm at. And to your point, I agree. Maybe knock Mike Evans down a tad, but also remember, if we think, I know he avoided PUP list, but if we think this signing was made because they are going to bring Chris Godwin along slowly, notes of November, like as a full-time player, have been reported, hinted at by beats so far from training camp. Remember, like Mike Evans, Julio Jones doesn't matter. Mike Evans exploded last year in the playoffs as a player. They moved around the field, 27% slot rate, jammed nearly 10 targets per game because Chris Godwin was not available. And so if Chris Godwin's brought along slowly, I still think there's a top 5 potentially ceiling for Mike Evans to access at least through the first month and a half of a long season. So that's kind of how I'm handling those situations right now.
Yeah, I would just add that I don't know how quickly Julio's ADP will rise. I was in a FFPC Slim draft yesterday after all this had broken, and he was. I got
some DMs, by the way, asking if it was me, and then I had to remind everyone there are many Johns at 4 for 4 since 4 for 4 John was the name they saw. I am Daigle on FFPC for anyone asking.
Well, I don't like my team name is something completely different because I don't want people using my rankings against me. But maybe somebody's pretending to be me. But I picked him up in the 15th round. He was still on the board, so I think that is fine. And I think he's a player that you're not going to start every week, but he might be useful when healthy. And is maybe an injury to somebody else on that roster. I'll be interested to see how much he's used in that first month of the season.